The theme is the gospel. Why we should care about it is because we need to, and if we do, if we are in Christ, we belong to Jesus. Third, why should we hear the gospel repeatedly? He says, first, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all the world. Though he'd never been to Rome, he had heard about the faith of the Romans. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit and the gospel of his Son. This is in verse 9. Without ceasing, I mention you, verse 10, always in my prayers, asking that somehow, by God's will, I may now at last succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. He wanted to go to Rome ultimately so that he could be a benefit to them, but also, as we see, so that they could mutually be a benefit to him. That is, verse 12, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers. I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented. We don't know why. We don't know what happened. Apparently he tried a lot to go to Rome, and it did not work. So he said, I've been prevented. In order that, this is why he wants to go as well, in order that I may reap some harvest among you, as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. That's non-Jews. Then he says in verse 14, I am under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians. What does he mean by that? Well, we've heard the term probably quite a bit, or we've read, when someone says Jews and Gentiles. What do they mean? They mean Jews, Jewish people, and Gentiles is just this huge term that means you're not Jewish. Jews and non-Jews. But another way you could say that from a different vantage point is Greeks and non-Greeks, barbarians. If you were a non-Greek, they just said barbarians. That's what he's getting at in that Greek word. I'm under obligation. Normally he would say something like to Jews and Gentiles. He says, I'm under obligation to Greeks and non-Greeks. It's a way to say I'm under obligation to everyone, both to the wise and to the foolish, the educated and the uneducated. The Greeks saw themselves as wise, the barbarians, those outside who lived in the countryside who weren't Greeks and well-established, they were considered foolish, both to the wise and to the foolish, all types of people. And then in verse 15 he says, so I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. Why does he need to preach the gospel to them? Aren't they already Christians? It says the whole point of who he's writing to are Christians. To you who are already saints. You already belong to Jesus. You're already loved by God. One of the biggest things that we need to keep being reminded of is that the gospel is not just something we need to hear in order to be saved, but the gospel is the very message, the very power of God by which God changes us and transforms us and makes us more like Jesus. That's why the Apostle Paul would say, hey, I know you heard the gospel, I know you believe the gospel, and you've already got your identity in Jesus. Awesome. I really, really want to come preach the gospel to you. It's because, as Tim Keller says, the gospel is not the ABCs of Christianity. The gospel is the A to Z. Every time we gather for worship, the focus needs to be the gospel. We're not saved by the gospel and then we grow in law, just hearing, well, this is what you should do. We need to hear the gospel frequently. And friends, listen to me. As long as I have breath in my lungs, as long as I have strength in my bones, as long as God lets me keep being one of the pastors at Ecclesia, of Ecclesia Muskogee, every single Sunday, when we gather for worship, a man will stand in the midst of the worship gathering, of the people of Jesus. He will stand on a platform so all may see. He will lift his voice so all may hear. And he will say something like this: your king has fought for you and won. His name's Jesus. Your enemies have been defeated. Their names, Satan, sin, and death. They've been defeated because your king is not like any other king. He went to a cross to redeem you, to purchase you. You are free. Every single week, you will hear that by God's grace. And if you ever stop hearing that every week, leave. If we're not opening the Word and proclaiming the gospel, we're fools. We need to hear the gospel all the time. We need to hear it repeatedly. It's how God grows us. As Luther said, it's right. Luther said, we need to continually preach the gospel to people and beat it into their heads. You need to preach it to them and preach it to them and keep preaching it to them. And you need to preach it to yourself, and I need to preach it to myself. What we need is Jesus. Who we need is Jesus. And may every week He be the focus. It's all about Him.